we talked about our immunity, and I know that's an area you're really passionate about. So immunity has just come back to life, I think, after 2020 with COVID dominating our news. And I think most people now realize or understand the importance of natural immunity in fighting infections. I'd like your thoughts and comments on that, please. And how do we actually, if it is a correct term scientifically, I don't know, but excuse me if it's not, how do we strengthen our immune system, immunity?
Yeah, I think I already mentioned that there is a strong relationship and the kind of a mutual relationship between metabolism and the immune system. So the immune system has a profound impact on metabolism. What we observe as insulin resistance, for example, typically occurs in acute infections. So when you get an infection, there are changes. Your metabolism is rewired to support the immune responses, and insulin resistance is one of the major steps to achieve special allocation of nutrients, of energy towards the immune system. So it's very often observed that acute illness results in insulin resistance. And the other way around, the immune system can be influenced by systemic metabolisms. For example, diabetics with constant high blood glucose levels have very sluggish immune responses, because the high glucose is a characteristic of acute inflammation. For example, when glucose is needed for a highly glycolytic immune response, producing reactive oxygen species and proliferating immune cells and these kind of things, and chronic high blood glucose could result in this chronic immune activation, in this very high immune activation, so that there is some tolerance that develops by immune cells, so that they are not overactive all the time. I mean, they are overactive, but not to the extent what would be absolutely detrimental in a short period of time. So that's why diabetes is still a kind of a slow deterioration, a slope not too steep. The body goes down that way. But if there was no such kind of a tolerance by the immune system, it would occur very quickly. So the immune system develops a kind of a tolerance for this high blood glucose. And when there is a need of activation, a infection comes in, there is a sluggishness, because it doesn't recognize it. Blood glucose goes up even a little further, but okay, it has been high all along. So what happens now? What's the problem? We need more tolerance, or is there an infection, or what's going on? So they need a really high activation, and that can be days of delay, and that days of delay is really detrimental. And I think that's one major factor in severe COVID. What we now should recognize, that the innate immune system becomes kind of too tolerant in metabolically compromised people, and they lack the quick and potent reaction to infections. And also, infections can be different from this respect. There are more novel pathogens where we can talk about primary infections, and primary infections. In primary infections, you cannot rely on adaptive immune systems. It's usually older people who have met with many pathogens over many decades, so they can rely more on their adaptive immune system, because they already have that specific knowledge built up over the years. Kids don't really have that teaching of the adaptive immune system yet. So they rely more heavily on the innate immune system, the less specific but very quickly reacting part of the immune system. And I think this is especially crucial in COVID, and that's what we can observe, that there is a huge difference between younger age groups and older age groups in severity in general. But it's not written in stone still. You can see healthy 70, 80-year-olds just the virus kind of pops off from these guys. And what's the reason? What's the real difference? Because these population level observations, again, that the similar thing with BMI in many diseases, that okay, there is a correlation at the population level. This is the same with age. We see this correlation on the population level, but still too many examples of individuals not fitting into their age group or BMI group or whatever group. So we have to think about really the mediating mechanisms, and not some comfortable or convenient or easy markers like BMI or age. And okay, age is the strongest risk factor. Age is not a risk factor. It's the status of the body, and the actual health status or immune status can be vastly different between people of same age. So one 70-year-old and another 70-year-old can be vastly different from immune function, from the immune function perspective. And that's why we see that one 70-year-old experiences COVID as a mild cold. The other one dies after 2 or 3 weeks. So there are huge differences, and it cannot be explained by age. Age is a population level kind of risk factor, but it's not a mediating mechanism.
Again, that's the importance of context. So you have to look at the context, regardless
you always have to look into the mechanisms, and because it's very complex, people just say, okay, but you won't be able to pinpoint the mechanism because it's so complex. I think if you study it enough and discuss it enough, you start recognizing patterns, and if you follow these threads coming from the recognition of patterns, you can add more meat to the bone, and then find the more precise mechanisms. So I'm always into the mechanisms, and I'm often ridiculed that it's impossible because it's complex. So, and cardiovascular disease, the mechanism, there are so many factors and so on and so forth. But if we stop looking, then this is 100% sure that we will never find the proper mechanisms.
Can we, based on what you explained, can we then say or conclude that one of the best things you can do for better immune function is trying to remain insulin sensitive?
Yeah, we can also call it metabolically healthy. So as immune function and metabolism are so strongly intertwined, it makes a lot of sense to remain metabolically healthy. Then you can be certain that when an infection comes, you can react properly. Your immune system is not suppressed or not too tolerant, as I kind of described previously. And with a proper level of tolerance and reactivity, you always need this kind of balance between the two. You can react very, very quickly, and then this huge overreaction, which comes later, will not happen. Because the problem is, if you don't react quickly at the very beginning, then when it's late, the virus is all over, and then you overreact. And this overreaction is usually what kills people in severe COVID. It's not really the virus. some people can develop tolerance to the virus, to different viruses, and they are chronic spreaders of viruses, and the virus proliferates at relatively low levels for months or years, but they feel healthy, and there is no real problem with it. Perhaps for other people, there is a problem that they remain spreaders, but otherwise, tolerance can also be a tool of the immune system, so that the damage is avoided, the extensive damage that the immune system can do when it overreacts.
Gabor, you did mention the insulin resistant state whenever someone is infected, and not necessarily COVID, but any other infection. Your body gets into an insulin resistant mode. I know that as a type 1 diabetic because, you know, whenever I have the cold virus or any infection, which may not be serious, just last about 24 hours, I know my insulin needs would go up. But I know that that's insulin resistant. I'm insulin resistant for as long as the virus is active in my body. So what is how does that work? What exactly is I do like to I know about insulin resistance during infection and the need for higher doses of insulin, but what exactly is happening there in the human body?
That's a very good question if you ask it a little bit differently, because you say that you need more insulin. So I'm not sure that's the perfect approach when you have an infection, because there is a reason your insulin need goes up, and that's the reason because you measure your glucose and your glucose goes up. Yes. But there is a reason why your glucose goes up, and that's because your immune system needs more glucose. So is it a smart thing to completely suppress your glucose level to healthy, so-called healthy levels? Again, it's typically context dependent. What is a healthy blood glucose level? And a healthy blood glucose level, like 5 or 90 in the US, it's healthy in general, but is it healthy when you are mounting an immune response to a acute infection? So that's how I would phrase the question, that you observe that your insulin need goes up to maintain the same glucose level.
Yes.
But should you maintain the same glucose level? That's I think a more interesting take on this. So I would, if I was a type 1 diabetic continuously measuring my glucose, I would quickly look up what the typical glucose levels are in non-diabetic healthy people during a acute infection, and then I would let my glucose level for transiently, I mean it takes 1 or 2, 3 days or something like that, be a little bit elevated around I don't know, 6.5 or something like that, instead of aiming for 5. Because insulin acutely in healthy people, and I can say also in type 1 diabetics, if well managed, is anti-inflammatory. So if you add more insulin, you are suppressing acute immune responses. And that's not necessarily a good thing when you are mounting an immune response. So I would let a little bit go, and when I start feeling better, I would help with more insulin to bring the glucose level down to normal, because it also helps the immune system mount a proper healing phase of the kind of any immune activation we tend to call inflammation, but it's kind of a anti-inflammation when you are healing from any infection or a injury, for example.
What a fascinating explanation, Orda. Thank you for that, because it's always bothered me, especially when you realize that despite all that insulin, you're not actually bringing the blood glucose is just stubbornly where it is. It's just not coming down, and you start taking more and more insulin, and it feels like you're just taking water. So you might as well just accept that you are going to run high for about 2 days. It doesn't, I mean, I can't remember the last time I had an infection or I was ill, but I remember in the past when I have been ill, it's just insulin just feels like you're just taking water. It just doesn't do its job. So maybe
Yeah, don't let it go very high and for an extended period of time, but temporarily or transiently, it may not be the best strategy to start dosing huge amounts of insulin while your immune system is busy with these pathogens.
Gabor, thank you for that. But now we are talking about insulin. That brings me to my next question about metabolic. I know you're wearing the t-shirt that says metabolic.
Yes, it's a new one.
Yeah, oh, it's brilliant. It looks really good. So tell us about Meterbolic. It's a company you're involved with. What does it do? What does it manufacture? I know it's hugely important for general health.
I'm not even sure that we can talk about the company as of now, because formally it's the kind of product or solution is developed by a foundation based in the Netherlands. And it's still not 100% decided to what extent it will be non-profit and profit. So maybe it will be a mix of both. But so far it hasn't been a classic company or startup yet. But yeah, back to the question. This Meterbolic is a initiative to bring common, not so common measurements to your home or to at least your GP level. So that, for example, we started out mainly with insulin and glucose. So so-called Kraft tests. You do an OGTT. And then you measure your insulin and glucose for 2 or 3 hours, and then you try to find the what pattern does this person represent, and what solution should he or she offer. So we started out with measuring insulin. We are still kind of a little bit struggling with home measurements, because that utilizes a smartphone, the camera of the smartphone with an app, and the app sends the results to the cloud, where it's being analyzed, and then a report is generated. And then we realized that smartphone cameras are all over the place. So you have very good camera phones, and then you have poor middle category phones, not to mention the cheap ones. So there was a recognition that we need to standardize a little bit. So we developed a so-called black box, which at least eliminates all the lighting differences in rooms. Then you have this small lateral flow assay, where you add your blood and then the carrier fluid, and then you put it into this box and put the phone on top of the box and take a picture of together with the standard, and then the software then compares the two measurements, the standard and the freshly made. We have a very strange problem here, because those enthusiasts who are especially interested in measuring their insulin at home, they are health enthusiasts, very healthy people who basically want a confirmation that their insulin is very low. This measurement becomes less and less sensitive at very low levels. So it's very difficult to make a difference by this smartphone photography method between an insulin level of 2 or 4. So there can be up to 100% inaccuracy, but I mean, both 2 and 4 are extremely good low insulin levels, but the accuracy of this method done at home is not very good at a very low level. So we kind of hit a wall where the main the population or the target group was not really the metabolically ill people in whom you can catch insulin resistance early, but those very healthy, like carnivores, keto dieters, or even vegetarians, lean and healthy, who have very low fasting insulin levels, and it's very difficult to tell apart that those low levels. So we started looking for not so healthy people to join the project, and then finally, I think more recently we have been going the GP based solution, so that mostly not so healthy people visit their GPs and then ask questions about what to do, and the GP can tell them that okay, we have this measurement available here. It would cost half a fortune if we prescribe or try to find a lab which does this for you, but it's a fraction if we do it here. And for those people who have a fasting insulin of even if it's not so high, like 5, 6, or 10 or something like those levels, even I think even 12 and 20 are considered healthy by mainstream medicine. So you see these not so healthy but considered healthy individuals, and then you do a postprandial measurement when they consume this 75 grams of glucose solution, and their blood glucose, as you know, can be normal. Their glucose response can be normal. Put into the non-diabetic or not even pre-diabetic category, but you catch quite a few people who already have very high insulin levels in response to this glucose load. So that's the benefit, catching people who have been on the road on this slope we discussed earlier for a long time, but not overt diabetics yet, and catching them earlier. And then the earlier you catch, the easier is to reverse the condition or reverse the trajectory for these people. So that's what we are doing, and along this bumpy road we have added more molecules, and we developed some nice indexes based on these molecules, so we can easily measure blood lipids at home or at the GP, and add or include these blood lipids in different indexes. So now we combine anthropometric measures like waist circumference and weight and height, and these basic anthropometric measurements together with lipid measurements and glucose. Or we can also do the insulin test easily, either at home, even at home, or at the GP.
Well, we need more of these devices, certainly the insulin measuring device, because people remain hyperinsulinemic for a couple of decades before their GP says, oh, now you're diagnosed officially as a diabetic. So, and
yes, and we also found that actual visualization is very important. So not only having the numbers, because these numbers mean almost nothing to people, but when you create a curve of insulin or glucose and do the test again 6 months later, for example, and then you have a comparison. So you did this intervention, you are adhering to this diet, but what does it do for you? And then you can point out that, look at this curve, how the insulin response shifted to the left, for example, so that you now have a normal first phase insulin response, which you didn't have. Your overall under the curve is still a bit high, but it's now more into the early phase, so you don't have this very late and long increase in insulin levels. So and then also you can of course add typical healthy measurement and compare the two in different colors. So I think visualization is also very important, and for everyday people they can decipher the meaning of or the magnitude of changes much more easily if they see together the last measurements and the current measurements, or compared to a typical healthy person. Then it's much more telling.
So I think a home sort of insulin measuring device that someone can use at home, alongside perhaps a CGM, would give us incredible data. I mean, CGM alone is a life changer.
I'm personally not a big fan of a CGM, because if you start understanding the mechanisms of how foods interact with digestion and absorption, then you will know, without having even a single measurement of a glucometer, how you will react to foods. Of course, there are differences. There is a variation between individuals, how they react to different foods, but the most important patterns are perfectly predictable based on the food, the type of food they eat, the order of different foods within a meal, the meal frequency, meal timing, and these kind of behaviors. So I can usually tell a glucose response based on this information provided without even measuring. And also, I think there is a big, I don't know if I should call it a confusion in mainstream medicines about at which time points they should measure glucose, for example. Because it has been, for some weird reason, I cannot even explain why, the mainstream medicine focuses on the 2-hour glucose response. And both the 1 hour and the 3 hour time points are much more telling than the 2 hour. This is quite funny. So usually when I'm interested in something, I ask people to provide me with 1 hour time point of glucose, and I don't care about the 2 hours at all. 3 hours is important, because if it's not back to normal by 3 hours, then it's of course not healthy. 1 hour is important because that's close to the peak. I think most people peak. You have a CGM, most people peak around 45-60 minutes following a carb-heavy meal, at least.
Yeah, and it'll be a completely different kind of, I know it from myself, completely different kind of peak if your meal, for example, is heavy in protein.
Yes, or heavy in fat can greatly extend the peak.
Absolutely, even up to 12 hours above observed on myself. Combination of fat and protein, for example, steak and cheese, I would remain slightly higher than my preferred normal range for, I would say, an average of 8 hours, which is interesting. But I think talking about CGM, it's important if you are diabetic, so you can understand which foods to avoid. But if you are type 1 like myself, where you have to inject insulin based on your current sort of blood sugar levels, it is immensely important or useful.
Yes, definitely. But normally what I see is that a lot of healthy or not so bad health people start wearing these CGMs, and they don't really know what to look for, and they don't know the inaccuracies involved, and the calibration need on a regular basis, and these kind of things. So it has to be supervised, or there needs to be somebody who explains what to look for, at least.
And even there, I think we have so much confusion, because if you look at diabetes associations in the United States, or even in the UK, the normal range, what they expect diabetics to be in, is like up to I think it's between 5 and 10. I mean, 10 is really high. If I hit 10, I start feeling sick. I feel like,
yeah, I can imagine. I'm not sure I've ever been at that height, but I don't really want to.
and they tell diabetics that it's normal, as long as you're within, that range. Well, how do you define normal? And then that takes us back to
The most important thing for the establishment is to avoid lows, glucose like hypoglycemia, because then the patients or lawyers could claim that it's the problem. It's an issue with the advice they get, that they can be that low. So I think that is just representing the interests of the establishment and not the patient. That's the problem. I think avoiding glucose dips is also very important. Variability in general causes at least as much harm as constantly elevated very high glucose levels. Mm-hmm. In fact, we have information on specific groups who have rare genetic diseases. They cannot process glycogen properly, for example. So this GCK, MODY, and these types of people, and they have an elevated baseline. So their glucose never goes below, for example, 6 or 6.5. So they start from there, and if they have the variation up, then it goes, the average goes really up. But it turned out that if people follow the relatively healthy lifestyle, these people, despite being a higher, an elevated baseline, their outcomes are not different from healthy people. So they can have a A1C of 6.5 or even 7 without any sign of the corresponding diseases. So I think it's more, and I think it comes back to how the immune system is tolerant or activated by these changes. So the immune system can kind of accommodate to a basic level of 6 point something, and then if it doesn't see the huge fluctuations and even higher levels, then this can be tolerated well. So again, different context.
Well, there's fluctuations. Yes, I just interviewed actually a type 1 diabetes specialist, and we did talk about the fluctuations and how dangerous they are. In fact, more dangerous than just remaining slightly above maybe what others define as normal. Yes. For a non-diabetic.
Precisely.
So as long as you're staying there and the fluctuations are minimal, your health outcomes, according to studies, seem to be much better than.
Yes. That's precisely why. We can say high carbohydrate, but especially high quick absorbing carbohydrate diets are not suitable for type 1 diabetics, because it's impossible to predict how much insulin you need to dose, and if you overdose a little, then you have a low, and then you have a low, you have to eat again some carbs, and then you are on a roller coaster, which could be easily avoided by just eliminating quick absorbing carbs or most of the carbs based on preference.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the fear that the industry or organizations have of hypoglycemic sort of conditions, especially in type 1s. It's interesting because the only time or times I've been diabetic, type 1 diabetic now for probably 40, I always forget. I have to go back and count the years, but I think it's 44 years now. And the only times I've had to rely on someone else to help me recover from a severe hypoglycemic sort of condition was when my diet was high in carbs, because the higher your blood glucose goes, the lower it will drop, the more severe the crash is. So now my fluctuations are minimal. It doesn't mean I don't get any fluctuations in my blood glucose, but they're sort of healthier fluctuations, and they're much smaller, within 2 or 3 millimoles.
Yes, this very quick drop in glucose has to be avoided by healthy people as well.
Yes.
because this is strongly connected to the so-called carb craving feeling when your brain interprets this, and it was shown that the trajectory of ghrelin, the so-called hunger hormone, is just the opposite of what you see in blood glucose. So when your brain experiences this quick drop in blood glucose and a quick surge in ghrelin, it panics and it develops this very strong especially eat some carbs as soon as possible. So that's how I could potentially explain the carb craving, which is so familiar to so many of us, because I was also there something like a decade ago. And now I understand how you can easily avoid it, even if you eat carbs. Even if you eat higher amounts of carbs, it can easily be avoided, these huge fluctuations in glucose.
I love it that you mentioned ghrelin, because I remember when my diet was 7 years ago, high in carbs, according to diabetes specialists, I was advised to consume carbs and more carbs and more carbs and take insulin to cover the carbs. I would have highs and lows all day long without a break. I can't take a break from it, can't take a break from my type 1 diabetes. And I remember after a high of, say, 16, 17, 18, dangerously high. Now, it's like, how did I do that? How did I even survive those highs? Now it's something shocking for me. If I hit an 8, I want to take action. But in those days, my blood sugar after pizza and pasta, it would go right up to 218. And then as I'm dropping down, I'd start feeling hungry even at 15, and 15 is 15 millimoles per liter. That's still high blood sugar. I'll put all the conversions on the screen later on, but yeah, that's still high. But even at the level of 15 and 14, as I'm dropping down, probably my ghrelin is going up and I'm feeling hungry.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And you can also try the trick which was discovered, I think, almost a decade ago, but by scientists, but by everyday people probably hundreds of years ago. It was discovered that if you eat a green salad first, then proteins and the fat in your meal, and then you add the carbs last, this is hugely mitigated. Even if you eat the same amount of carbs, if you change the food order within the meal, it has a dramatic impact on the glucose fluctuations. And then also, if the glucose fluctuation is lower, the insulin is lower. So the overall insulin response is lower, and not to mention the peak. So, you can find these meal order patterns in traditional meals, for example, in many areas of Mediterranean countries. In France, for example, they start with a salad. In Japan, it has been long known. There is I forgot the name. It's called whatever diet kaiseki or something. I don't remember the name, but it goes that you eat the salad, the plant roughage first, and then you eat the proteins, your fish and the meat, and only after that you take the rice, and then dessert. And it's hugely effective. So this should be a very easy tool, for example, for everyday people. If somebody is not ready to reduce their carb intake, for example, or not even reduce the bad carbs in their diet, this food order can do a huge impact. I have friends in India, for example, who told me after sharing these studies in my Facebook group like 5 years ago that not many people in India can afford to not eat carbs or not eat rice or quick absorbing carbs, because vegetables, meats, other animal products are much more expensive. So they are on a low budget for food, and they simply cannot afford. But if they follow this food order pattern and follow it consistently for weeks and months, they experience a huge improvement in their A1C and their well-being in general. So it's a very easy tool, and I think it should be everybody should be shouting this from every rooftop that geez, you should at least do this. You can eat the same food, just take care of the food order.
And it's quite simple as well in terms of if you're filling yourself with all that fiber, obviously the roughage, that has a satiety effect,
Yes.
right? Followed by the protein and fat, and protein is also satiating. So by the time you've come to your rice or the bread and cheese afterwards, then you're not going to gorge yourself on bread.
Yeah, but it's not popular. For example, among low carb groups, it's not popular because it's easier to say don't eat carbs at all, and then you are done. And I say that okay, it depends. I mean, in the long run, it's always about adherence, so or compliance. How long this guy can follow this diet, and if one specific diet is much easier to follow for an individual, then he's or she's much better off if they take the carbs or at least some of it, and then change the food order, stop snacking, because it helps enormously. Because that hunger which you describe after typically 90, 120 minutes of taking a quick absorbing carb meal, you experience this carb craving. It's typically 120 minutes, 2 hours. And then we are not on this roller coaster of eating every 2 hours anymore. That helps enormously to comply with any diet.
It's interesting because I was chatting to a family member actually who's a carb eater, like heavy carb eater, and how they constantly feel hungry and crave carbs again an hour, 2 hours after a large a carb load. And the symptoms that they described to me were so similar to my hypoglycemic symptoms. As I'm having a hypo, I'm shaking, I'm hungry beyond control. I have this insatiable hunger. I could literally empty the fridge. And this is how these people were feeling hypoglycemic symptoms, even though they're not diabetic.
Yes, because it's not about the absolute levels. It's the opposing trajectory of
Yes.
quick glucose dropping and quick ghrelin increasing. So when you understand the mechanism, it's much easier to find an explanation. Not looking at arbitrary settings that okay, hypoglycemia is when you go below whatever arbitrary set point like 4 or 3.5 or whatever. It doesn't matter. You can have this, as you described. You can have this feeling at well before you reach hypoglycemic official hypoglycemic thresholds.
Gabor, it's been a fascinating conversation. We are going to wrap this up very soon, but one last question. Okay. We are called the Low Carbohydrate and Fasting, so the channel. And as you mentioned, I mean, low carbohydrate is it can be anything between 30 grams of carbohydrate per day to up to 100 or 120 grams of carbohydrate. People still call it low carbohydrate diet. But I just want us to talk about fasting. And again, it depends on context. But what are the generally sort of acknowledged benefits of fasting, and who is it most appropriate for?
Yeah, I think it's appropriate for almost everybody. So I couldn't really exclude huge groups unless some people have problems with fat lipid metabolism, and they cannot really fast, especially for extended periods of time. But otherwise, and of course, you know, I'm lately I've been in my immune period, we can call it. I described the periods of muscle, liver, adipose tissue, and the gut, and now I'm in my immune period. So I will of course say that the most important effect of a bit more extended fasting, like more than 1 or 2 days, is on the immune system. So the kind of rejuvenation, or whatever it's called in English, so regeneration of immune cells. When in general, fasting has this effect of getting rid of old junk stuff from the body. Finally, you have a break. The system at least thinks like this. Finally, we have a break. So let's have a look at what we have here, what we can utilize for this long break, and break it down, get rid of it finally. And this also applies to immune cells, kind of cells which have been going into this senescent type, and let's get rid of these, and we can create new T cells, for example, more efficiently when following a longer fast. So I think it has a huge impact on immune function. Perhaps twice a year, or at least once a year, it makes sense to do an extended, like 3-4 days of fasting. And it makes a lot of sense to start to prepare with lower carb intake. So go ketogenic for a week or so, become fat adapted, if that's a thing, before starting a fasting. It's also easier to start from a ketogenic state, and the two can combine, and you don't need so long a fasting period if you start from a keto phase. And I'm kind of a big fan of cycling in general. So I don't really like to follow any diet religiously for very long periods of time. Even keto, I like to do in cycles. So I do moderate carb, taking care of food order also. That would qualify low carb for most people, at least the effect. Low carb for most people. And then I do a keto, really low carb period. And then sometimes I even go kind of carnivore for a couple of days following a keto, and then skip a day of feeding, and then I had my kind of fasting period, and then go back. And I don't really do these days. Last couple of months I've been stress eating a lot, so that's really not good. And I think stress is a problem for most people. It kicks you off any bandwagon very quickly.
So is a longer fast coming your way soon?
Yeah, hopefully I'll be there soon, and then I can get rid of these projects which I've been having involved in recently, and then go back to kind of normal feeding patterns and not being stressed out continuously.
And fasting is only just sort of recently came to our sort of attention, but a lot of people still think it's something controversial, not eating. I mean, it's a natural human sort of state. We were not built to stuff ourselves every 2 hours. Our ancestors didn't eat every 2 hours. They probably went several days without food between hunts, for example.
Yeah, but I think they are right in that starting a fast from the roller coaster we discussed is extremely difficult. So no wonder they find it difficult even to think about it. But if they normalize their feeding patterns prior to going on a fast, it's way more easier.
Mm-hmm. And even I have to mention here before we close this up, I mean, even I, with type 1 diabetes, I do longer fasts. I do intermittent fasting daily. I don't eat 6-9 times a day. I vary between 1 and 2 meals, but I do, I've done up to 90 and 100-hour fasts, and I've written blogs about it for anyone interested. I'll put the links in the show notes below. Gabor, thank you so much for your time today. I can't thank you enough.
Sure, you're welcome. I think I really enjoyed the discussion, so I hope that the audience will as well.
Thank you very much, Gabor. You have a good day.
Yeah, have a nice day. Bye bye.